What's up guys, welcome back to another Big Rock Games tutorial. Today we're going to be showing you how to build and animate the spawn points in Call of Duty Zombies. So here we have our subway scene. Let me show you what that looks like real quick before we get started. So every time we add a board, it's going to be animated and put onto the wall with a little particle effect that you can modify yourself. And we have 6 boards locking up onto the wall, and that's what we're going to show you how to build today, just with primitive cubes and a material. So let's build a new scene and get started from scratch. Okay, so now we have our new scene. The first thing I'm going to do is add a quad, and this will be the invisible wall that we're stacking all the boards on. And let's make that a little bigger. Next, add a cube that we will use as the board. In Call of Duty Zombies, they have 6 boards that they use. We'll configure one completely and then duplicate it and move the positioning a little bit, and that will make building this whole thing a lot faster. Let's shape this into something that looks like a board, and I'm going to add a light to the scene so we can see what we're doing. And I'm going to put a material onto the cube. So now we have our board. I'm going to put it into the quad and have the quad be the parent item of all of our elements. I will put this as spawn wall and board 1. To animate this board, we're going to use the animator component. So go to add component on the board and search animator. And for this to work, we're going to need a new animation controller, our animator controller. So let's create a new one in our project folder and call it board animation. And I'm going to put this into the board animator controller. So now it has an animator controller, but we want to build an animation for this board. And I'm going to open the animation window by going to Window, Animation, and dock that in here. So in here we're going to add curve, and this will bring up the Create New Animation window, and we will have a different animation for each of the boards that comes up because we want them to end in a different location on the board wall. So I'm going to name this Board Animation 1, and we want to position it to where our first board should be in the end position. I think here it'll be easiest to do the animations backwards, and then we can set the speed to -1 so they go in reverse, but we'll do them backwards so we know where they will be on the wall when they come up. And the first movement we want to apply will be coming away from the wall, which I will put at 0.2 seconds. And when you move it, it will save that position in your animator, in your animation window. I'm going to add a little rotation so it doesn't look so static. In the game it sits in the same spot for a little bit, so we're going to move down the timeline 0.2 more seconds and save position by clicking the Add Keyframe button, and then select rotation and add keyframe for that as well. This will hold it in place from 0.2 to 0.4 seconds. So I'm going to go to a minute and drag it down to the ground, and you can see if you replay the animation, it's going back and down to the ground. And lastly, I added rotation to when it goes down to the ground so it doesn't look so boring coming up, because remember this will be coming in reverse, up from the ground and stick to the wall. So I added a little rotation just to make it look a little better. So now we have our animation for our board. So now I'm going to add a particle effect so it looks like dust is coming out when it hits the wall. So on the board I'm going to go to Game Object, Create Empty Child, and this will be our dust effect. And the reason I put it as a child is so I can change the location to the end of the board, and I'll create 2 so it looks like both points of contact on the wall, dust comes out. And so after we are done with this, we'll duplicate it and move it. For the dust effect, go to Add Component, Particle System. And for the duration, put 0.2, lifetime 0.25, speed 10, put the start size to 2, then go to emission, bump this up to 200, and then go into shape and select sphere and drag in the radius so it is just around the end of the board. Then go to color over lifetime, and we're going to give it a gray color with a alpha so you can see through it a little bit. So for the starting color, something like that, 120, 120, 120. Same for the ending color, and for the starting alpha, I'm going to go 150. I'm going to add another marker halfway through, 150 again, and then the end alpha to 0. Now we don't want this looping over and over. We'll just call it once right when it hits the door frame. So uncheck the looping field. If you click stop and simulate, you will see what we're looking for. It's just a small effect that'll give some life into the movement. And now that that's done, I'm going to duplicate it and put the other one on the far side of the board. So now we have both effects in the board. Next we'll add a script to the board to tell it when to play the particle effects. So click add component with the board selected, type script, new script, play animation. Double click the play animation in your inspector and it should bring up the monodevelop screen. And the first variable we want to put is a bool that will tell us when to play the animation. So I'm just going to give it a public bool play so we can see it in the inspector screen. And also I want to reference to the particle system. So I'm going to add a variable particle system. And since there's two, it will be an array. Dust. And in the start function, we'll want to reference our local variable to the particle systems. So dust equals get components in children, and it will be particle. Don't know why it's not auto-completing. So now we have a reference to our particle systems, and in the update we will do a very simple if statement. If play equals true, which you can just say if play. We want the dust animations to play. So dust, and then the item in the array, play. And the same thing for the second, since we have two particle systems. And then we want to set our play bool to false. And that's it. So go back to the Unity screen, and we have our board set up with our particle system. So now we want to tell the animation when to trigger the play variable we set in our script. So I'm going to set it to true right after the beginning, because remember we're playing this in reverse, and if we set it to true at the very beginning, that is when the script ends, and since it's not looping, it will continuously set the values that you have in this spot of the animation. We don't want that, we just want it to play once, so I'm going to do it right before the beginning, and if you click in the inspector, set it to true, it will save that in your animation, and that's the only spot you want it to be true. So go to 0, 0 and set it not true, and a little after, set it not true. So now when you hit play, you should see the animation happen right before it hits the wall. And so now we want to put this animation into our animator controller. So if you open your animator controller, you will see the board animation is the default, which you can tell by it being the color orange. So we need to make an animation without any movement on the board, so it can be its default state and not trigger the board animation until we want it to animate. So I'm going to click on board animation 1, create new clip in the animation window. So at the end of the board animation 1 is where it's on the ground, that's where we want the default state to be. So if we go over to our still board, you can set the board on the ground somewhere. It doesn't really matter because we're going to turn off the render for it anyways. And go into mesh render and uncheck that box. So now we have our default state. Go back to your animation controller and set that as the default state by right-clicking and selecting Set as Default. So now we have a default state and a board animation 1. Now we're going to create a script in the main object to tell it when to play the board animation 1. So click the spawn wall object and click Add Component and find Script. I'm going to name it Board Script. So if you double click it, open. And here we want to keep track of how many boards are up, so we know which board to animate when we have multiple boards. So I'm going to set integers for boards and previous boards. And we'll need a reference to our animators. So we will want public animator board anim. And in the start we want to reference our animators. So board anim equals get component in children animators. Oops, I have an extra S up here, remove that. So in the update function, we'll want to tell the system when we want a new animation. From the last state of the update, we will check how many boards it had, and when it goes through this update function, it will check how many boards it wants to have, and if it's not equal, it will set an animation. So in the if statement, we know that the previous state does not match up with the current state, so I'm going to set the previous boards to the current boards, so this only runs one time. Then depending on how many boards there are, I'm going to have a switch statement, and this will tell us which animation to run. Right now we only have one board, but we will be having 6 at the end. So case 1, which will mean there are 0 boards and we want 1. All we want to do is run the animation, which you can access it with the array that we referenced earlier, and play. And here we will want to insert the name of the animation, board animation 1. And later we will have 6 boards, so I'm going to copy this 6 times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the array 2, 5, since it starts at 0. And the names will all be different since they will be going to a different spot on the wall. And I forgot a return statement, which you need so it does not pass through to the next case when it runs case 1 or any of the cases. And I misspelled animator, so just check your spelling, save the script, go back to the Unity window. And now if we hit play and change the boards, since I made it public, we can change it while we're running. Change the boards to 1, then the animation will run. But you can see it's looping, which we don't want that to happen, and it's going the wrong direction. So to change that, you'll want to go to your animation, board animation 1, and uncheck loop time. And then go into your animator controller, board animation, and click your animation and set the speed to -1. This will put it in reverse. Okay, so now if we hit play, you can see the animation going in the correct direction and the particles showing on both sides of the board. So now let's duplicate our boards. We have 6 boards in total. Rename the boards just to avoid confusion. We have 6 boards. Now we'll have to do an animation for each of the boards, so they'll be in different locations when it hits the door frame. So go back to your board animation 1 in your animation window and create a new clip, call it board animation 2. And we want it to be similar to board animation 1, just a different starting location or ending location. And we can copy and paste all of the keyframes. So if you command copy, command C, go to your board animation 2 and paste. We'll have the same animation, and we can modify where it is going to be placed by moving it. So move it up a little, and I'm going to rotate it a little bit. like that. And if you click play and go to the spawn wall and change the board size to 1, you should see the animation play, and 2. So I did the same thing for boards 3, 4, 5, and 6 and set the speed to all of them to -1 and make sure to uncheck the loop time checkbox in each of the animations. And if we hit play and go to our spawn wall and increase the boards, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I'm going to modify the top one, it's a little high. And if we change the main camera to the other side, because that's the side you will see, then we can see the door. In the complete animation, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And in the next tutorial, I'll be going over how you can have the enemies damage this and how you can rebuild it with your player controller script. And that's it for this tutorial. If the video helped you out, remember to like and subscribe. And thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.